Live from Brooklyn, welcome to the SYCK Podcast, starring Alan Stein, where he steers your career with Kadima. I'm Russ Reba, along with your host, Alan Stein. Today, we have another installment of SYCK Tricks. This time, with an expert, he's gonna enlighten us on raising standards in the hiring process, or what we like to refer to as raising the bar, and how this can affect you. He's made some magic with one of the biggest companies on the planet. Alan, give us a little taste of what we're gonna hear.
Hey Russ, Eric Hudson is what we call a bar raiser at Amazon. And Amazon is known for being one of the most rigorous interviewer in the tech industry. And what Amazon does that is unique is they have a calibrated interviewer that they call the bar raiser, which raises the bar for all talent there. And what Eric is going to do on this interview is he's going to spill the beans. He's no longer at Amazon, so he's sharing the truth about how Amazon calibrates the rubrics that they use, how they assess talent. And he's sharing that with the SYCK audience today so that you can be prepared to ace the Amazon interview. And if you can ace an Amazon interview, you can ace any interview in the tech industry.
So correct me if I'm wrong, and I could be totally wrong here, but is bar raiser a term that's kind of related to Amazon now?
It is unique to Amazon. Amazon has a specific interviewer in part of their interview loops called the bar raiser, and they are a calibrated interviewer who has gone through hundreds of interviews and have been evaluated to be able to assess talent and to raise the bar of talent within Amazon.
All right, very interesting. All right, so let's get into it.
Want to welcome you to the SYCK Podcast and would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience here, Eric.
Thanks a lot, Alan. Yes, thanks for having me on here. Really excited to be here and get the opportunity to have a conversation with you and to reach the audience here and talk about some of the big things and how to get better. But yeah, let me introduce myself. I'm Eric Hudson. I've been in the recruiting industry for a little over 12 years now. I currently am a senior manager of talent acquisition at DocuSign, where I lead a variety of functions there. As Alan mentioned, I was at Amazon for 8 years, which included a wide variety of different roles and positions. Started at Aerotech, which is a recruiting firm, where I learned my recruiting chops and everything about recruiting in general. And then I pivoted, of course, into Amazon, where I did everything. I mean, you name it: fulfillment center hiring, executive level hiring, AWS, Alexa, devices, compliance, and operations. I did it all there. And one of the biggest things I think that I got from my Amazon experience that I think will stay with me for the rest of my life and really got me into coaching was being a bar raiser. I was a bar raiser there for 5 years, and of all the feedback I've gotten in my career, I've never gotten more direct, constructive, and intensive feedback. And basically going through a gauntlet of boot camp training to become a really excellent interviewer, or as what Amazon would call a risk mitigator. But anyway, I'm really excited to be here today and excited to share what I know and just to have a conversation with you, Alan. And thank you for inviting me.
Glad you're here. Let's get to our first SYCK trick. Talk a little bit about the bar raiser. So you mentioned that you were a bar raiser at Amazon. I'm familiar with that concept, but talk about what that is. And you also use the term risk mitigator. So talk about how someone becomes a bar raiser, what the purpose is of the bar raiser, and what sets them apart from a regular old interviewer like myself.
Sure, absolutely. So the bar raiser has a lot of mystique behind it at Amazon, as it should. So Amazon's culture is really driven by the bar raisers and through the hiring process, and it's actually genius if you think about it. It's basically a mechanism that Jeff Bezos created for Amazon, so that there were gatekeepers into the culture, and to become a bar raiser, it's a training program that, first of all, to get into the training program is hard enough as it is. You have to be a top performer within the company. you have to have been with the company for at least a year, and you have to have at least done 50 on-site interviews within just reoccurring activities as a either a top contributor or as someone who is active in Amazon's hiring. So it's not easy to get in. And then once you get in, you have to be nominated by another bar raiser to actually get into the process. Once you're nominated, then you got to go through the BR core. They make sure everything is there and needs to be there for you to be approved for the training. So once you enter the training program, you then get a BR mentor, and your BR mentor is assigned to you. And your BR mentor is usually the one that, quote unquote, says you're ready, and will basically look at all of your reviews. So each time that you interview, you become a bar raiser in training. So usually on an interview loop, if you have two people on your interview, one of them is a bar raiser in training leading the interview, and the one that's not talking is the bar raiser. And the bar raiser's job is to sit there and to basically judge the bar raiser in training, and then give constructive feedback afterwards, whether that's very direct feedback or that's feedback that's like, you did a good job, you need to do better here, right? I got both. Which made me way better, right? And during that program, as you train and learn, each instance of feedback is documented into basically like this form. So think of like this automatic form that gets feedback documented. Your mentor can see all that information, and you meet with your bar raiser mentor weekly to go over that feedback, how you can get better. And then ultimately, and they'll tell you too, like, why didn't you have a loop this week, right? Because that's another thing that's very interesting. Before, you had to have 2 interview loops a week, but now it's only 1 loop a week that you have to do as a bar raiser. But that takes a lot of time. And here's a caveat. Another reason why Jeff Bezos is genius. They don't pay you extra to do this. This is completely, on your own. Hey, I just want Amazon to be better, right? And they somehow have, 0.5% of the population who does this and does it for free. And it's just a sense of pride thing, right? So this goes back to Amazon's frugality leadership principle. But I will say, from a self-development and a learning perspective, it's a game changer and it's a life changer. At least it was for me. So as you go through this training program, usually it takes about 6 months to a year to get through it, depending on when your bar raiser mentor thinks you're ready. And you also have to do at least 20 on-site loops as a bar raiser in training before they consider you or deemed ready or deemed like minimum ready. Some people
those are 20 interviews where you're interviewing and someone is evaluating you.
Right. So like the on-site loop that you were on, you probably had a bar raiser and you're in your loops. You're doing 20 of those minimum before you're ready to be a bar raiser.
Right. But I just had one dude interviewing me, but you're saying that would have been someone interviewing me and then someone else sitting in the room that is evaluating that person who's interviewing me as the candidate.
Right. In your case, so sometimes the Brit's not available and it'll just be the bar raiser. And so the bar raiser will interview you one-on-one, which actually it's better to have that happen than to have a bar raiser in training interview, because the bar raiser in training is so nervous usually. And also, like, they want to impress the bar raiser, that they tend to kind of be a little bit more like build themselves up, and be harder, probe deeper, double click on like every little thing that you have to say. And I mean, so yeah, you probably, it's like, if you have a bar raiser, it's probably better to go for a Brit. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Sick trick number 2, wait for it. It's Amazon's hiring process. Is the typical process for the Amazon interview, first you get noticed by a recruiter, the recruiter will have a conversation with you, then you typically go to the hiring manager, and then after there, then the on-sites occur. Now, in the world of COVID, it's mostly virtual, but at that point, then you would be unleashed to the bar raiser, in addition to a series of, I guess, 3 or 4 other people part of that interview loop?
Correct. So, which is a great question and a great segue. So you have the recruiter screen, the hiring manager screen, and then you have what they call it the loop, but I call it the gauntlet, right? I always used to call it, let me get you ready for the gauntlet. And I think I wasn't trying to intimidate anybody. I was trying to just get them ready, get their mind ready, because it's tough. It's tough to get through it, and not many people do. So once you're in that loop stage, the bar raiser is in charge of it. So the bar raiser is in charge of that loop, and each person in the loop is assigned 2 leadership principles each. In the tech world, everyone's assigned 2 leadership principles each, except for the guy doing the tech competency. So he has the tech competency and a leadership principle, which is usually dive deep. And then basically each person will drill down on their respective leadership principle. The bar raiser will do a pre-brief, and the bar raiser will basically delegate to the hiring manager on the functional stuff, but then he'll stick to like, okay, here's what each person needs to be focused on. Really, he's like the program manager of the interview process. And so once the pre-brief is done, then of course you'll go through your interview, the holistic interview process. And then you'll go to the debrief is afterwards. So after the loop happens, the debrief is a 30-minute call for pretty much every level except for L8 and above. So like director and above, executive level, those are typically an hour. But in those debriefs, a hiring decision will be made. And the bar raiser will facilitate that entire call. And basically he will interview the interviewers. So he'll dive deep. So let's say, for example, if you were on my interview loop and you were like, I mean, he gave me contributions. I don't know what he actually did, though. He said we very often. Well, then I'll say, okay, well, did you ask what his contributions were? Did you dig deep in that? Or are you making assumptions and being subjective? Right. So like I will interview the interviewers to hold them accountable. Right. Yeah. Which, by the way, that's why I always say use I before we, so that that doesn't happen, because that can happen anywhere and you won't have
as a candidate, as you're communicating.
Right.
Your responses. Like a lot of people are lean towards we because they're more collaborative in nature, but especially at Amazon and most companies, you need to have a mix of what we did as a team and what I did as the individual.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. So that's a great segue into that. But anyway, the bar raiser will interview the interviewers and facilitates the debrief, and we'll make sure that in the pre-brief conversation, we talk probably about the top 5 leadership principles in the role. And we'll say, okay, there's a risk for earned trust. You said that was the number 1 leadership principle, right? He has all these positives, but how can we allow him to come work here if he has a risk for earned trust? Does anybody have...
What do you mean that you said that's a number 1 leadership principle? Is that different for each role or each position? Because I think there are 16 leadership principles now at Amazon. When I interviewed, there were 14. They've added a couple since.
Correct. So yes, that's correct. What you were trying to say, right? So like that leadership principle is the most meaningful for that position, right? And usually that is divided by the hiring manager and the bar raiser, right? Mm-hmm. So you mentioned me talk about the risk process. So like this is a good segue to that. So Amazon believes in not hiring the best person for the job, but they do believe in not hiring the wrong person for the job. So the bar raiser's job is just that exactly. It's not a hiring process. It's a risk mitigation process. So do we see enough risk that we should pass on this candidate? So even if he is the right person for the role, when Amazon sees too much risk to hire the candidate, they're more likely than not to not move forward just because there's too much risk there. And they're willing to bypass this person being the right person for the role just because they're measuring the risk in the hiring process. And ultimately, they take that in account and they say, and they'll ask the question, do the strengths and the superpowers this person have available that we've seen today, does this address the hiring risk that we see today? And if anybody's on the fence, if they're on the fence, they'll move to not inclined. There's a saying at Amazon, if you're on the fence, you're not inclined. So that's another thing. Most people be like, we can coach him, we can get him better at some companies, but Amazon's like, no, we're on the fence here. Pull the plug, we're not inclined. Another big call out with the bar raiser is the bar raiser has the most seniority, no matter what their level, in that meeting. So I would have directors yelling at me blue in the face because because the bar raiser has to be inclined or not be a barrier to a hire. So if the bar raiser believes there's too much risk, the bar raiser could say, this is a no-go. And we will not, there will not be a hiring decision made. Hiring manager can't do anything about it. Director can't do anything about it. VP can't do anything about it. They can escalate all they want. But majority of the time, 99.9% of the time, the bar raiser is going to stand because he's trying to defend the culture. He has no skin in the game. He's an ejected third party. He's not on the team. He's not a hiring manager. It's like I was a recruiting manager, and I was interviewing, software development engineers and business intelligence people and solution architects. I didn't care, if about that team. I mean, I did. I wanted them to raise their bar, but like if I was blocking a hire, I genuinely believe that person was too much of a risk to hire at Amazon. And it's the same thing for all the other bar raisers. They don't care about that. So the bar raiser's job is to make sure that they're not making a rash decision and to say there's too much here. There's too much going on here. We can't hire this person because there's just too much risk associated with that person. And he can trump anybody he wants. The hiring manager, VP. Again, I had some people who left the room just hot in the face. And I was like, I mean, you guys are like, I remember one time they were trying to hire a risk manager. Actually, it was kind of funny, a risk manager. And they were trying, and like the only strength they had was his ability to make phone calls. And I was like, are you guys crazy? And everybody on the call was like pretty new to Amazon. I was like I had like 6 years experience at the time, and everyone there was like less than a year. And like, I can't allow this to happen. I can't allow this to happen. The only thing that this guy has that's strong is his ability to make phone calls. Are you kidding me? No way. No way. Like, you guys are not making this hiring decision. And, I hate to be that guy, and everybody here will be like, wow, Eric, you're kind of kind of an asshole. But I mean, you have to do what you had to do. And that's what makes Amazon great, is because they have that culture where they make sure that the best person for the job, or that they don't hire the wrong person for the job.
Right.
And they wouldn't be that way. And that's what makes the culture. So being a bar raiser was really interesting. And I got to see just so many different stories. And after that, whenever I was approached to be an executive coach, I had no idea that this ability that I had, really obscurely and accidentally backed into would become valuable. And all of a sudden, it's like I'm talking with people, I'm interviewing people, and people are like, wow, that was a really thorough interview. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's probably for my bar raiser skills. And then people actually want to pay me for it. Pay me to interview, and then I can, and one big thing is, like, whenever I'm coaching and people are coaching with me, is I can tell people and I can say, and I can give them feedback in real time. Whereas if you go interview at Amazon right now, you're not going to get feedback. They're not going to tell you what the feedback is. Whereas I am going to be very blatantly and vehemently honest with you and say, like, look, your scope is too small. This is not going to work. You're going to have to throw this away and start over new. And that's the kind of feedback that people need to hear, because I can either tell them that, and that, they're not going to be happy to hear it, but they can change it, make it better, and get the job, or they can take that half-baked example and go into the interview and waste their time. You know what I mean? Yeah. And like, I think it's pretty cool that I get to do it. And I think that, in my executive coaching, I'm really getting to change people's lives. And it's really cool getting to see people who start off like almost like stuttering to talk to getting, $400,000 L6 offers within AWS, and their life changes. They're getting, $150,000 bumps, and it changes their lives. So the bar raiser experience changed my life, and in turn has changed other people's lives. And I'm very thankful for the experience.
Yeah, a lot of things to unpack there. So the bar raiser, how many people are typically in the loops? Is it about 5, like one bar raiser plus 3 or 4 other people?
On average, it's 5. So L5,
four plus the bar raiser.
Correct. And then 6 if you include the bar raiser in training, but really 5 overall interviews. If it's L7 or L8, they might make it 6. Most is 7. And then for L4, it can be 3 to 5.
And L's are the levels that Amazon and Google and Facebook and Microsoft and Salesforce, a lot of companies have these levels. The higher the level, the higher the responsibility, the higher the compensation, the higher the bonus, the higher the RSUs. Heads up for what's coming up. SYCK trick number 3 goes behind the scenes of the debriefing sessions at Amazon. at Amazon, when they go to the debrief, are they debriefing multiple different candidates? So there could be a role open, like head of customer success for Amazon advertising. And how does that debrief work? Does it work like, hey, we just interviewed Alan. We're going to figure out if Alan is worthwhile of this role, or are they looking at 4 different candidates and they're like, who's the best one to be head of this customer success role?
So Amazon's a peculiar company, and you're probably noticing that with the bar raiser thing, right? It's very, not many people have bar raisers. Or if any other companies have bar raisers for that matter, I don't know. But when it comes to hiring and making the hiring decision, Amazon, unlike most traditional companies, does not compare candidates, right? So, like I'm seeing at my current company, and and from feedback from others, typically it's okay. Let's interview this person. I want to see 3 more candidates before I make a hiring decision. I want to see what the market looks like. But what Amazon does, and it's kind of brilliant if you think about it, is they don't care if it's the first person, the 8th person, whatever that they hire. All they care about is one thing, and that's one thing called the hiring bar, the Amazon hiring bar. And when you interview for it, when you look it up, you'll hear a lot about it. There's a lot of mystique and opaqueness around this specific topic, around the Amazon hiring bar. And the Amazon hiring bar, what it is very simple, actually. It's that, is this person going to raise the overall effectiveness of the team and the overall effectiveness at the level? So basically what they look at, and usually the bar raiser will then delegate this to the hiring manager and learn more about it, is what does the team's holistic team look like, right? So if there's 5 people, right, or 6, we'll say 6 people, there's 6 people that are on this team, 6 L5s on this team. Is this person better than 3 of them? Is he going to be better than 50% of the people currently in the role? Does he move your team's needle to the right? And one thing that they always check on at the very end of the debrief is, if we take this person, we've seen all his body work, we see the greens, the reds, the yellows that we identify with his leadership principles and his stories. If we drop this person on the team, does the team get better? And if the answer is no, then they typically move to not inclined. And on top of that, they look at, what is this person's long-term growth? Do we see this person growing long-term? Now, when Amazon was growing, and when I first joined Amazon, incredibly, the second piece to the Amazon bar used to be, can this person be promoted in 2 years? Because it was all about, as you said before, up or out mentality and growth. But as Amazon has gotten bigger, now 1.5 million employees, if you include all the warehouse workers out there, probably around 100,000 corporate employees. If you consider that, they realized, okay, we can't just focus on up or out completely model. Let's look at long-term growth, because not everybody is going to be able to get promoted within 2 years, right? And you need people, you need good talent there. So they eventually relaxed that requirement from 2 years to move into the long term. But that's the Amazon bar, and that's essentially what they use whenever they're like, there's the barometer of, can we hire this person, and will they be successful here?
In that 30-minute debrief, are they talking about one single candidate, or are they talking about multiple candidates for that role?
Just one candidate.
So they spend 30 minutes on a single candidate.
They will. And here's the thing: they don't care if it takes a year or 2. I've seen roles take 2 years to get filled, several times to get filled. I've seen. I have one myself, and it's kind of a funny story. There was this role. It was a principal PMT role back when I was recruiting.
What does PMT mean?
Product manager, tech product manager. Right. So basically, a creme de la creme of the product managers, principals. So this is the kind of role that's it's paying buku amount of money, and you really know your stuff, and you probably worked at a very large tech company before this, right? So it took us over a year to find the right person to fill this role. And finally, when we did, it was a person who lived in Australia, and it took us 6 months to get them to start. They were 6 months in a role, and then they internal transferred, because at Amazon you can internal transfer at any time. So I'm like, okay,
Right.
that took a year and a half for the person to be in the role for 6 months, and now I have to start all over again.
SYCK trick number 4 talks about the hiring manager process. If you're the hiring manager, this has got to be a little bit frustrating at some time, because you have this role on your team that you need to fill. And then you get candidates in and you evaluate them one at a time. So as soon as like one candidate comes in that is good enough, because you're not looking for perfect at Amazon, they're looking for good enough and to mitigate the risk. So if a candidate like comes in tomorrow that is good enough and meets a bar raiser's criteria, then they go ahead with that candidate, or do they wait to see if there's other candidates that are in the mix for that role?
90% of the time, they offer the candidate, right? Because it's so hard to find the person that raises that bar and increases the overall effectiveness of the team. Now, I will say, if you have two candidates that are in the process concurrently, right, and they're interviewing in tandem, let's say you and I are interviewing for the same role in the same week, they will wait for that last person to finish out, because it's only a couple of days, and you have 5 days to give the other candidate feedback. So then at that point, if they have two excellent candidates, both are inclined, what they will do is the hiring manager will have to make a determination of which one he wants. So like at that point, they do stack rank. But the other person is an inclined piece of gold, right, at Amazon. So then what the recruiter will do is the recruiter will say, do we have another role in the team that we can fill it with? And majority of the time, they do. They will take the inclined candidate and they will find a role. But, of course, in this market, you have to re-explain the role, you have to resell the role, you have to talk about the scope of the role. So who knows if they would accept it, even if they are inclined, right? And it's a brand new position. Or a lot of times they'll be an inclined candidate. There's not a role in the team. So that recruiter will then shop that candidate around Amazon to similar positions that they might be a fit. And then usually it's a one-off conversation with that hiring manager, because the hiring manager has no context. All they know is it's an inclined candidate. And if that conversation goes well, then they'll make the placement there. Another thing that commonly happens is, I told you what happens if the bar raiser is not inclined and everybody else is inclined. Now, if everyone else is not inclined and the bar raiser is inclined, the hiring manager doesn't have to hire the person to his team. So the hiring manager could be like, okay, I don't want to hire this person. I don't think they have like the functional chops. But the bar raiser's like, culturally wise, this person's awesome. Recruiter, I want you to go find another team that would review this feedback and consider them for the team and for this kind of role. So then the recruiter will go hunt for that candidate a home somewhere else. And of course, the hiring manager has to sign off on it based on the feedback if they want to be with them. But that's other things that can happen too that are curveballs in the process that are kind of peculiar than most traditional companies deal with.
So I generally advise my clients to try to move the process along as quickly as possible, because all jobs are hired essentially on rolling admissions. At most other companies, there's usually 3 to 5 candidates applying for a role, and they try to pair them up at the same time so that they get to the finish line near the same, and then you get into a room. And what I've done, like at Google and Salesforce and Facebook, you basically compare those 4 candidates at the end, and you're like pass or fail, and then the ones that pass, how you stack rank them. Like if like how many of them are actually hireable or not. Sounds like in Amazon's case, it's even more critical. And like the reason why I tell people to move fast is you want to be in that final 4. Because if you submit your resume too late, the contest has passed you by. But at Amazon, it seems almost more important to, when a new role is posted or you see an opportunity available, to act as quickly as you can. Because if you are a good candidate, you will get the role. Like if you're the first candidate that comes in for a newly posted role, and you meet the bar raiser's criteria and the hiring manager and the people in the room are inclined to hire you, they're not going to wait to see 3 other candidates before they act?
No, they're not. They're
not. So
at one point, and I don't know if you can even do this anymore, just because, as you know, this market is incredibly hot. Mm-hmm. And people are moving so fast. And it's a buyer's market. You can't this is not 2009 anymore, where the employer has their arms folded. The candidate has their arms folded, but only for a little brief time, because they're going to have their arms folded with 5 other people or 5 other companies at the same time. But Amazon used to do what was called, especially for SDEs, pod events. So basically what they would do is they would put one date in the ground, and they would do a hiring manager screen with like 10 SDE2s, for example.
And SDEs are software developer engineers, and like Google calls them SWEs, software engineers, but it's a similar across the industries.
Right. Exactly. Thanks for clarifying. But they would interview those 10 candidates, like hiring manager screens, and they would say, okay, we're going to do your on-site interview on the 8th of April, for example. And then they would all come in, and you'd have different hiring teams, and you would just do massive hiring pods. We call them a pod, just like a massive like event.
Yep.
And then like we would have one debrief at the end where we would go over all the candidates. Now, we would still use the same philosophy of, are they better than 50% of people in the role? But psychologically, I think it's hard not to compare other candidates. And we would find people in those meetings more likely to be inclined on candidates that they would not have been inclined on before, just because they would see candidates that they would give them more of like a relative reference point, right?
Yeah.
Of like what other candidates look like. And we love those because, you could get 50% incline rates in those pods, which usually it's like 20%, if you do it one-offs. So like we started doing those a lot more regularly at the lower levels. You can't really do those at the higher levels. It's almost impossible.
And we used to call this like bulk hiring at Tableau. It's like,
bulk hiring. We call it bulk hiring at DocuSign. But that would be the only caveat where it was like more traditional than the normal.
Curious about how much leverage you have in your negotiations? This SYCK trick's for you. When the offer is extended, talk about the leverage that the candidate has from a negotiation perspective that might be unique to Amazon, that is different maybe for another, like you guys are like operating in serial, like you're saying yes or no on a candidate, and you don't like, if I got the offer and from Amazon, and it might have taken them 5 candidates before they found me and made the offer. It's probably taken them a while. So they said that I'm good for this role. Does that give me more leverage than at a company like DocuSign or most companies where they're comparing you to like 4 or 5 candidates? So because it's a different dynamic, because from the hiring manager's perspective, depending on how long the role's open, they could be frustrated because a lot of candidates are not meeting bar raiser criteria, and they just need to fill this role. So how, if at all, is negotiation different with that sort of hiring process at Amazon than the typical hiring process that I've seen in every other company?
I will say this, and believe it or not, and maybe it's just because this is with me, and I know how things work there. So like whenever I have somebody who wants to do what I call a negotiation package, let's say I'm coaching somebody that wants to go interview at AWS, and they say, okay, I'm at an offer. I like to do your negotiation package to make sure I maximize my my earnings, right? Amazon really is like most companies in that they will go by your expectations. It doesn't matter if you're a passive candidate and they found you found them, or if you're an applicant and you're an active candidate. It doesn't matter if there's 5 other candidates in play or it's taken a year to fill the role. All they care about is the ranges of their position and your expectations. And usually, and be very quite frank, that the ranges have nothing on your expectations and competing offers. So usually whenever I'm educating someone on getting an offer from Amazon, the first thing is you want to do your research and understand, because there's plenty out there. My 2 favorites are FYI.levels.
Levels.fyi.
Yeah, levels.fyi. Yeah, I got it backwards. And my favorite is Blind. And Blind is real-time feedback. And people usually are like, what is Blind? And why should I go to this? And I mean, if you go into blind and you get an offer from Amazon, AWS, Facebook, Google, it doesn't matter. And you say, hey, here's the offer that I had. Am I being lowballed? Can someone help me with the ranges? There are people on there. It's an anonymous app. People will help you. They will tell you if you're getting lowballed or not. They'll tell you, what to ask for. Because here's the thing, you're playing poker. And in poker, why is it so difficult? You can't see your opponent's cards, right? But if you can see your opponent's cards, you're going to get them to fold every time. Or you're going to fold because you know they have a good hand, right? So and you're going to bait the pot if they have a bad hand. So the goal here is to get that research so you can see your opponent's cards. And if you can see that information, then that's what you should be making the offer against. And I always recommend going 10% higher than the max of the band if you can figure out what that is. And the reason for that is because that's your anchor. And in negotiation, your anchor is where everything happens. Everything gets negotiated around. They have their anchor, you have your anchor. Right? You're not, and it's not guaranteed. You might as well just go ahead and realize you're probably going to get less than your anchor, right? Yeah. Now, if you get your anchor, you're going to be pretty damn happy, right? You're going to feel like, wow, right? I call this in general the thrill number, right? And the thrill number in negotiation is all about the number that you already have in your mind right now. We all have a number in our mind. It's like, if I got this number, I'm thrilled. I don't care if I'm going to go shovel, ditches, not to put disdain on shoveling dishes. But if someone's like, here's the number, for this job that you're shoveling ditches, I'm going to be thrilled. That's a thrilled number, right? We all have it. So you want to think about that, and then also think about that 10% higher than the max number that you have. And you don't want to settle. You want to try and get someone as close as you can to it. And then that's where the whole negotiation conversation happens. And I usually have verbiage that I use when I'm negotiating. And here's the goal about negotiation is silence, right? A lot of people feel uncomfortable with silence. A lot of people feel uncomfortable negotiating, right? People are scared to death to ask for more money. But let me throw something back at you about how Amazon negotiates. And you can use this in your negotiation tactics whenever, you out there decide you want to do it. And that is Amazon always says no to the first offer they get. Always says no to the first offer.
This is when they're working with a partner or a vendor or something like that.
Partner or a vendor or anything. Yeah, exactly. So it's the same thing for you in any kind of offer negotiation. You should always say no to any offer you get. And before you're terrified to say no, look, you're the person they want. They've interviewed. If they landed on you to make the offer, you're their top choice. You're the person that they want. You cleared their hiring bar. The ball is now in your court, and you're exchanging your time for their money, right? You are a product. They have selected you. You submitted your RFP. That you have won the proposal, and it's now time to pay the piper, right? So don't be scared to ask for more money. Don't be scared to say no. Say no. That's not what I want. This is the number that I want, and I guarantee you, 9 times out of 10, they're going to come back with a higher number, right? It's just how it works. And going back to silence. So after you say the number, just shut up. Don't say anything else, right? Because you can talk yourself into a ditch very quickly into making concessions, and you ultimately want them to fill the gap with talk. Because when they talk, they're like, well, I could go back to the hiring manager and, well, I can see what I can do. You've already won. Because now they're going to go back. They're going to advocate on your behalf, and you're going to say they want this number, right? It's way better than them saying, no, we're not doing that. No, you know what I mean?
So as much as Amazon trains the recruiters, the team, the interviewers for the interview process and selecting talent, it sounds like they're not as rigorous around the negotiation process, because they could be training their negotiators the same way that you're telling the candidate to do here.
Correct.
But once the offer is extended, the recruiter who is communicating, negotiating on Amazon's behalf, it's in their interest to get this deal closed, because then they have another role filled, and then they can move on to their next one, and they hit their numbers. I'm sure they're gold on number of roles filled in some way.
Yeah, no, they are. They're gold on numbers filled, not on budget or anything like that. So
Right.
the recruiter is not incentivized to save the company money, right?
Yep.
Their whole goal is to really focus on, can I close this? And that's why you want to make them really close to you and an advocate. You're negotiating with them, but you want them to be an advocate on your behalf.
SYCK trick number 6 is all about impact.
When you go into an interview, you've gotten the interview. Your resume means a lot. You should be able to speak to it, but don't think about that. The big thing to focus on is the examples that you create in a behavioral interview. And what I challenge you to do is to focus on creating transformational examples and not transactional ones. Because if you half-ass an interview, you're not going to do well. Really focusing on the big critical moments in your career, the moments you're most proud of, and not the day-to-day, not when you delivered an Excel email to your boss, right? And really think about what was the big impact that you created, and making sure that you can reiterate that impact to your interviewer as you end the example. For example, and because I did this, did that, we were able to go from 30 steps to 1 step and reduce man hours by 50%. Really show the broader impact of what you did and leave the interviewer thinking, man, I want to take that and I want to drop it in the future of my company because that's impactful. That's my advice.
Awesome. Coming with impactful stories for your behavioral-based questions, and almost every company asks behavioral-based questions. And deliver the impact and deliver the results at the end of what you delivered.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for listening to the SYCK podcast, and a special thanks to Eric Hudson for joining the podcast today. You can connect with us at syckpodcast.com. That's SYCK podcast.com. You can even leave an audio message for Alan to get started on steering your career with Kadima. We'll play some of those messages or answer your questions on the show. Alan, do you have any teasers for the next episode?
Of course I do, Russ. Next up, we're going to be pivoting from Amazon and the bar raiser to the video game industry and talking to an impressive woman executive from the gaming industry. Jane Chung Hoffaker will be coming up in the next episode, and she'll be sharing what it's like to be a woman executive in a male-dominated video game industry.
I love it. All right, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and you're going to love the next one.